to Rwanda. So over to you, Pete.
Cool. Thanks, mate. So guys, this is my story. It's about a cycle ride that I did in 2012 from the UK to Rwanda in Africa. And I'm going to try and run you through some of the highlights and some of the key things that I learned on the journey. So I'll just get straight into it. First, I'll tell you a bit about me. So I'm 38 years old now, but when I kind of signed up for and did this ride, I was 29. And that was kind of a big thing for me to get something significant in terms of a journey in my diary before I was 30 years old. I'm British, originally from Essex, which is east of London, for anyone that isn't from the UK. I'm currently in the art industry and I have been about 16 years, and I'm also a business and marketing consultant. I've lived in Dubai for over 5 years now, and definitely feels like home. I've been into sports my whole life, so mainly running more than anything else. And I got into cycling because I got a really bad knee injury from running, and that pushed me in that direction. And most recently OCR, which is something that George Crew and myself kind of slowly got into, and progressively done more in the OCR field the last few years. I love house music, I love good coffee, I love going to stay in great places, and I love war movies. I'm not a big fan of karaoke, mainly because I can't sing and I can't stand bad singing. Swimming, I'm not a fan of. I've almost drowned twice in my life, so it's put me right off. And I just don't like bad driving, which is not a good thing in Dubai, but anyway. So, cycle to Rwanda. In 2012, London was hosting the Olympic Games, and as part of the Olympics, all Olympic teams had to stay in different towns around the UK. The Rwanda Olympic team was staying in Bury St Edmunds, which is in Suffolk, which borders Essex, which is where I'm from. Now, money had to be raised by local governments to enable this to happen. So the initial proposal by the local government in Bury St Edmunds was to ride from UK or Bury St Edmunds to Rwanda in the gym. So as a community, people would go to the gym, get on the bike, and then cycle a few kilometers and try and do the total distance between the entire community. A friend of mine was on the local organising committee for this in 2010, and he proposed that someone actually do the ride for real. So actually cycle from Bury St Edmunds to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. And he put it out to a group of us, and there's about 10 in total, which had done some previous rides. And I was the only guy in that group who said yes. Everyone else had an excuse. They just had a baby, they thought it was crazy, and they didn't think it would happen. It was 2 years away, they couldn't think about it. But I just said yes instantly. I actually responded within 30 seconds because I wanted to do it. It felt like the right thing to do. And once the proposal was accepted, there was no turning back really. So we had 2 years to work towards it. We left on Saturday, the 28th of April, 2012, and arrived on the Rwanda border on Tuesday, the 3rd of July. And that is 66 days in total. One thing that's really important to know is that Rwandan children don't have sport on their school curriculum. So I said I got into running at a young age. Well, that's because my school supported a whole range of different things. I'm sure all of you started your sports in school. But a Rwandan child has worse than a 1 in a million chance of getting to an Olympic Games as an athlete. I mean, they just have no chance. And that hasn't really changed a huge amount today, to be honest with you. And this was a significant driver for part of the sponsorship side of things that we were driving. So we tried to raise $50,000, first of all, to enable the athletes to stay in the UK as paid for guests, contribute a bit of money to help the Rwanda Olympic team get to Rio in 2016. But also really to raise money to put sports equipment into Rwandan schools. And we did actually achieve that. We managed to get around 70 schools worth of sports equipment with the money that we raised. One of the key things was riding unsupported. So to actually do this challenge, we came to the conclusion that we'd have a much greater chance of raising money if we told people we were doing it without help. And the definition of that was to completely self-sustain ourselves. So we were not allowed any physical support. No one could drive us, move us, pull us, transport us anywhere. We had to do it all by pedal power as much as we could to achieve the distance and to sustain us on the way. So again, no one was allowed to feed us or do anything along those lines. Logistics, communications, planning and advisory were allowed. So we were able to phone people up, get help when we needed to in terms of advice. And we needed some logistical support as well, which I'll tell you about. So we expanded the team from 2 to 4 people. So Pete W was my friend at the time that came up with the idea, and he's in the grey on the right-hand side. I'm the guy in the blue on the left. Julian is a guy from Norfolk with a pink jersey on. He's also a photographer. And then Neil is the guy on the far right-hand side. Now, Neil at the time, I think was 52 years old, and he's an ex-national champion cyclist. What was quite interesting was we all had kind of different roles. Pete was doing more of the planning and navigating. Julian was in charge of the photography. I was in charge of kit and a number of other things. And Neil's experience was one of the key things we were going to lean on for the journey. The reason we had 4 of us, not more, was because we didn't feel like we could raise enough support from sponsors if we started building the team even larger. And also with a big team, your chance of success does actually reduce. Less is more in many cases when it comes to this kind of thing. So in the 2 years of planning, we actually looked at a range of different routes. I hope you guys can see on the screen, but on the bottom left-hand side, plan A was to go through Libya. And the reason for doing that was we wanted to minimize the amount of time we weren't on land. We looked at going through Italy, into Sicily, and across to Tunisia. But obviously, at that time, there were problems. The problems in Libya escalated, and we moved to look at plan B, which was going through Turkey, Syria, and that kind of direction. Now, our issues originally were kind of concerns around Lebanon and Israel and various other elements, but Syria wasn't an issue. However, in 2011, Syria started to escalate into a series of different problems, and the only way we could actually make it work was to cycle to Athens in Greece and then get a flight from Athens to Cairo. There simply was no other way of doing it. One of the questions at the time was to look at getting a ferry and rather than flying from Athens, but all ferries had stopped because a couple of months out, there were the uprisings in Cairo that had escalated even further. We did see that as a potential issue, but we still managed to get over there despite the ferries being cancelled by just jumping on a flight. So you can see our final route from the UK through Holland, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Serbia, Macedonia, into Greece, down to Athens. And then we flew from Athens to Cairo in Egypt and followed all the way down through Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. Or so was the plan, at least. So gear is something that you spend a lot of time looking into. I know all of you guys are into fitness at different levels and I'm sure obsess at different degrees about what kit to use, when, how, why, where. And obviously, I mean, from my point of view, from a young age, I've always loved getting the right kit. And we spent a lot of time speaking to adventure cyclists about the best options out there and how to do things. We ended up going for Koga, which is a Dutch brand of bike, which a lot of adventure cyclists have used and is tried and tested. There were billions of different options that we looked at for the cycles themselves, but we ended up going for quite near the top end of adventure cycles. We used aluminium frames because of the lightness, despite the fact there are some challenges welding aluminium. We had double layered wheels. We had tires that had a decent, a lack of rolling resistance. They weren't particularly heavy, but they still had reasonable enough grip to get us across some tough places. We all had different handlebar setups. I went for a kind of tri setup on my handlebars to enable me to drop down when I needed to, even though that added weight. One of the most important things was the integral light setup. So all of our lights were powered by dynamos on the wheels, and we could actually charge our phones from the bikes themselves. The bikes could carry an awful lot of kit. They could take a lot of weight, so that was hugely important to us. We chose Brooks saddles, which are leather, handmade in the UK, have been made in the UK for over 200 years, and they wear to your backside. So you can actually see in the photo, that's me having done think about 3,000 kilometers on that seat, and it felt very comfortable after that kind of distance, but you're never going to wear through it. It's super, super thick, the leather. At the top, I mean, nutrition-wise, is an interesting discussion. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but, you know, I tried to balance off the amount of weight versus actually having some decent energy sustenance to last for 70 days. Cliff sponsored us, luckily, so we were able to get as many gels and bars as we needed. And there was a whole bunch of other things that we were carrying as well. But we really needed to focus on getting as much of our food as we could en route to try and keep the weights down. You can see on the top left, there's something there called a lifesaver bottle. This was something that had been recently developed in 2010 by a group in Essex. That water bottle filters anything apart from seawater. So you can literally, you can go to the toilet in that bottle. You can scoop up raw sewage. You can put anything in there that's liquid, put it under pressure, and it will filter it and turn it into drinking water. And I did have the luxury of trying that out, which I'll tell you a little bit later on. Shoes wise, there were lots of different things on the market. Luckily, Specialized had brought out what was a very comfortable shoe to wear, with a really good integrated clip system. The shoes for me were super important because we spend so much time in them, but they needed to be efficient on the bike. Taking a foam roller with me was something that my physio was absolutely adamant that I had to do. I managed to take a normal standard foam roller and chop it down to a third of the size and use that every morning and every night, which was useful. There's a whole bunch of other things in there, but the Buff headwear. So Buff, as a brand at the time, was doing an awful lot of promotion of a lot of new things they'd developed. They sponsored us. I would say in the top 5 things that I had, that I used on the journey, certainly through Africa, were those Buffs. Obviously, I'm sure you guys are using them today to run around in as a mask, but they are just incredible. The way that you can wear them, use them, utilize them. I wore them every day and used them every day through my journey. So that's a kind of a brief summary of some of the gear. And I tracked using a Garmin. The technology wasn't anywhere near what it is today, but I was certainly able to upload quite a lot of the stats. I didn't really care too much about a number of different things. It was really more just about the distance we'd gone, average speed, and various other bits. Power meters and stuff definitely weren't a priority for us. So the training side of things, look, today, I have a completely different approach to training. And obviously the more time I spend with the likes of George Crew, the more I get insights into what should or shouldn't be done. The science today is a lot more advanced than it was back then. Really, training consisted of just getting miles in on a bike. It started seriously about 12 months out, and I gradually increased the number of kilometers I was doing on a daily basis or weekly basis. The worst thing is that when we were leaving, the fact that we were leaving in April in the UK, anyone that's from the UK, you know that the winter and spring is not the nicest time to be on a bike. So I did a lot of riding in rain and cold weather. But the best thing I ever did, and I'd advise anyone to do this, is to get, well, everyone knows about this now and is doing it because of the lockdown, but get a spinning bike, get your bike set up in front of a TV, and I would do 3 hours in the morning, wake up early, and just sit spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, either watching a movie or doing some work on a laptop. Getting a spinning bike was the best thing I've ever done in my home, and that allowed me to get lots of miles in. One of the key things during training was to load the bike with gear. So just going out for a ride on any standard bike is relatively straightforward. But when you start to load the bike with weight, everything changes. And when you're going up a hill and your bike is laden with over 20 kilograms of gear, and the bike is fairly heavy anyway, then you're going to be pushing, very hard to get up those hills. So from my perspective, I knew that the hills were going to be the hard thing. When you've got a heavy bike, you can keep momentum on the flats, but going up is tough. So I spent most of my time on hills. I did not do huge numbers of kilometers. I felt like I would get used to that through Europe. It was more about building the ability to keep going on a hill when you've got a heavy bike, more than anything. And I was incredibly grateful for that training. One thing that we should have done was train more as a team, but geography limited us. Neil was based in the US. The guys were based the other side of the country to me. I actually lived in West London for most of this. But that's something I kind of regret, and I'll explain why in a second. We did get support from celebrities. We're very lucky. Mark Beaumont, Sally Gunnell, Chris Boardman, they all came on board to give us some support. Instagram did not exist back then, so everything was through Facebook. And these guys were talking about us a bit in the press, which was nice. Carol Becker was the chief physio for the British Olympic team. She happened to be one of my clients as well when I ran an art gallery. She effectively saved my journey. My right knee was giving me a huge amount of stress in training because of the weight on the bikes. I'd actually got into cycling because of an issue with my knee. She resolved it for me. But when I was on the bike in Europe, it came back and I was in a world of pain, but she got me through it. So I will talk about that in a moment. So spoiler alert, I'm actually going to tell you now the result at the very beginning, because this is more about the journey and the lessons learned than the actual result itself. 3 out of 4 riders arrived in Rwanda. We had cycled 9,000 kilometers. We did it in 66 days. So we beat our target by 4 days. And it was 160 kilometers per day average distance. Now, the reason why we had a 70-day target in the beginning was we were going to fly back with the Rwanda Olympic team to the UK. So we couldn't miss that flight. So we made it tight on purpose. And we made it. We got there in advance. We actually raised more money than we intended to as well. The reason why 3 out of 4 riders arrived, I will explain in a moment. So learnings. In the end, the journey created 4 separate stories rather than one combined story. And I'm going to tell you about my journey. The pain is long gone, but the lessons have stuck with me for life. And these are the 4 key things that I have learned. 1, what to do in tough situations. 2, how to control your feelings and get focused. 3, some lessons in dealing with people. And 4, finding your why. Why is key, and I'll explain. Before I started, I had some doubts. So before we do anything in life that we've never done before, you have doubts. And I doubted my capability. I had never done anything like it in my life. And I also thought there was a strong chance at some point I might just give up. Getting hurt was a concern. My parents, my family, my friends had a whole range of concerns. Being bitten by snakes, getting beaten up, getting shot, getting, a whole range of different things. I actually wasn't particularly worried about some of that stuff, purely because if it was out of my control, it was out of my control. But getting hurt in terms of getting hit by a car or falling off my bike, that would stop me from doing it. I was more concerned about that than anything else. My knee injury recurring during training was a real problem, and I was worried that would come back. And I did have some doubts about the team. The more time we spent together, there were some clear strengths and weaknesses that were coming through. I did have some confidence though. Throughout my life, I had had self-discipline. I had some big tests in life as well. I had gone through a lot of military selection. I had a place at Sandhurst, which I didn't take. I had had a serious car crash and almost died. And I'd almost drowned as well in my life. So I'd been through some things that had pushed me to some limits. And I was also quite open-minded. I was in a position where I didn't know fully what to expect, but I knew that I would be able to respond. And I had not yet faced anything in my life that had been something that was insurmountable. So I knew I could overcome things as long as I kept an open mind and I was adaptable. So the journey itself. Europe actually became a warm-up. Now, the reason I say this is because compared to Africa, Europe really was quite straightforward. We were going through a lot more countries, but the distance wasn't anywhere near what we'd be doing in Africa. And there was an abundance of reasons. So the terrain was generally flat. If anyone cycled through Holland, it's pretty much flat. And as you go through Europe, you can stick on cycle trails, stick to rivers. most of what you do in Europe is pretty straightforward and easy. We were lucky with the weather. It literally only rained 3 days out of the 20 days that we were in Europe, which is unheard of. We had great road surfaces, and there was an abundance of accommodation and food. The challenges actually mainly came from the team, us as people. The first one was the dilemma we faced in Germany. By the time we'd hit Germany, we realized that we didn't need the amount of kit that we had on our bikes. We had packed full camping gear, cooking equipment, a whole range of different things, but it became very clear and apparent that we could just get accommodation and get food in restaurants and get food in cafes and find snacks as we went along. We didn't need to be carrying all this gear. So Neil got his brother to drive a van all the way from the UK to meet us in Germany overnight and dump a whole load of our gear. This is where one of the first team falling outs happened. Two of the team, namely Pete, the other Pete, and Julian, wanted to keep most of their gear because they wanted to camp in Africa. Myself and Neil wanted to dump most of our gear and get rid of it because I was under an honest belief that if I had to sleep in a tree or sleep in the sand, I would just do it in Africa. So this dilemma happened in Germany. Two of the guys decided to keep gear, two of us decided to dump gear. As a result of that, it's basic physics. Myself and Neil were able to go quicker, get up any climbs faster, were under less stress, took less of the day to complete what we were doing. The other two guys were taking longer. So by the time we got to Vienna, there was a real divide. Myself and Neil wanted to get the day done as quickly as possible. The other two guys wanted to get up early, cycle for a very long time frame, go to bed quite late and wake up early again. We didn't see the point in that. So we actually got to a point where we decided that rather than fall out a lot, which is what we were doing, we would cycle in 2 pairs rather than 4 of us. And if myself and Neil made more progress, so be it. That did happen. So actually myself and Neil got to Athens 1 day before the other guys, a full 24 hours ahead of the other guys. It wasn't a race, we just had a different way of approaching things. Another challenge was the highway that we hit in Serbia. So myself and Neil hit this highway that was actually pretty much the full length of the country. And we actually hit a section that was being developed. So it wasn't the main road. We had a tailwind behind us that was absolutely crazy. And I'll just show you that on another slide. But my knee had gone the day before. And my physio on the phone was telling me it would pass, it would be okay, not to worry about it. Even though I was pretty much crying my eyes out all the time because of the pain, she convinced me it would go. And it did in a couple of days, but on the highway, it hadn't gone. Neil had with him some painkillers that were pretty close to morphine. And that was the only way I was going to get through a crazy day like that. I took them and it actually put me in quite a bizarre place. He had to pull me off the road and off my bike because I was apparently going crazy in terms of trying to go too fast, trying to do too much, trying to extend the day more, saying a whole bunch of stuff. So taking that medication actually was a good thing for my knee, but sent me off spiraling into a place of mental stupidity. So that I became a challenge and liability as a result of doing that. The Greek mountains. So when Neil and I actually got to Greece, his right leg, his quad muscles completely locked up just before we got to the Greek border. And no matter what we did to try and release them, it didn't make any difference. So we had to take all of his gear and put it onto my bike to enable him to get over the mountains. And he was pretty much cycling with one leg to get over. And I was obviously running at the same kind of speed as him because I had twice the amount of weight on my bike. But we worked together to get through it and came out the other side. The other thing that I developed in my left hand was something called cyclist palsy, which is where you, the vibrations of a bike smash the nerves in your wrist and kind of create an inflammation inside there. And that the nerve element that gets bashed around basically makes your hand cramp and starts to distort your hand and reduces your grip strength. And you basically get to a point where you can't pick up anything small with your hand and your fingers start to pull apart. And I had that as I started to go through Europe. It got worse. By the time I got to Athens, my left hand was almost out of action in terms of being able to do things with my hands. So those were the challenges that I faced in Europe. This is the day in Serbia. So you can see we basically did the whole length of Serbia and a third of Greece in 9 hours. So we traveled 279 kilometers. And you can see there, I mean, averaging about 20 miles an hour on a 20 kilogram bike with 20 kilograms of gear is nuts. We were actually at a point where we were undoing our jerseys to try and get more wind to push us along, like sailboats. So I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And it was crazy. But that gives you an idea of our best day and what can be done. Almost 1.5 countries in a day. So that was Serbia. So on to Africa. And like I said, Europe really was mainly good days. We fell out as a team and there was a couple of challenges, but it was nothing like Africa. And this is where I really found some of my limits. So this was 6 countries, but it took 46 days to do. And the reason for that is that Africa was 2/3 of the journey. It wasn't half of it. It wasn't a small amount. Ethiopia, for example, took 10 days to get through, which is half of what it took to get through Europe. So, Egypt. The minute we arrived in Egypt, there was a problem. Now, when we were in Athens, sorry, I should explain. When we got to Athens, Neil's leg was so bad that he sat me down in a room and said, there's no way I can carry on. So I will be a liability from this point forwards. I just about got across those mountains and got into Athens, but my leg isn't getting any better. So you've got 3 choices. You either come back with me, ride with those guys, the other 2 guys, when they turn up, and ride with them from Cairo, or you do it on your own. You cycle from Cairo on your own and meet them in Rwanda if they get there. And I was no way was I going home. I was really sad to lose Neil as a companion, but I wasn't leaving. I certainly wasn't going to ride with those 2 guys, with all due respect to them, and we don't talk today. I found them to be a huge liability. Their mentality felt more like they were on a holiday and trying to enjoy themselves than actually focusing on the challenge that was ahead. And I knew if I knew anything, Africa was going to be way harder than what we just experienced. So I decided to go alone. Even though we flew from Athens to Cairo together, I left Cairo and I didn't see them until Rwanda. When we arrived from Athens, however, the other Pete did have a problem in that his visa had been put in the wrong name. So his name wasn't matching on his visa to his passport and started to create a problem in Cairo, which I did work to help him with. But a little bit of advice to everybody, if you're going to travel the world or do anything like this, when you get your visas in advance, make sure your visas are properly, accurately put into your passport, because you won't get across a border if they're not. I learned a big lesson. Luckily, it wasn't my lesson. I learned it from someone else. The only threat that I actually really faced in Africa was as I cycled out of Cairo. And it was kind of an introduction to Africa. There was a guy on a scooter, on the back of a scooter, so it was 2 guys on the scooter, decided to come up alongside me and talk to me, lull me into a false sense of security and rip my sunglasses off my face while I was cycling. That was the only threat I basically got in Africa. It was a really weird, surreal moment. And I really thought that was my introduction and what it was going to be like for the remaining 50 days that we had left. But luckily, nothing worse happened than that in terms of people threatening me. Following the Nile Road through Egypt is completely insane. I don't know if anybody's been down it. If you've driven down it in a car, then you won't have experienced the full onslaught to your senses that the Nile Road provides. But it's always busy. There's always someone there, whether it's an animal or a person or a car. The dust is crazy. And everybody beeps their horn at you all the time, non-stop. And I did actually speak to someone about it and say, why does that happen? And apparently they beep their horn behind you to let you know that they're behind you. They beep as they go past to say, I'm coming past you. and they beep when they've got past you to tell you they've got past you. Now, when you're getting that all day, every day, it drives you absolutely insane. And that for me was actually one of the biggest challenges. I did have headphones in a lot of the time, but it didn't drown out that kind of noise. But that is a crazy road. And if you look at the population of Egypt, most people live along that road or very close to it. So it's pretty understandable that it's busy. The hottest temperature that I experienced in the whole journey was in Egypt. So I cycled in day one and seemed to cope fairly well, but day two peaked at 53 degrees. Around, I think it was about midday, I completely stopped sweating and passed out. I literally fell off my bike. So I pulled over to the side and that was it, blacked out, fell over. I basically moved from levels of heat exhaustion to heat stroke. Now, if I'd lived in Dubai for X number of years before I started this journey, I wouldn't have attempted it that time of year, and I would have understood how to manage heat. But I didn't, and we didn't know and hadn't really planned for it. I was lucky. So this guy on the right-hand side was the guy who woke me up, got me into this small area that you can see. I actually took a photo. You can see my bottle of water there. He basically laid me on a bed and then put loads of water with a hose pipe underneath to allow it to evaporate, to cool me down. And then gave me about 3 or 4 cups of the sweetest tea I have ever drunk. It was like sludge on the bottom, but that completely woke me up. I was in a super bad place. A stranger stepped up, helped me, didn't want anything in return, didn't speak any English whatsoever. And within a few hours, I was back on my bike. From that moment onwards, I knew that I had to change my plans. I could not cycle during the daytime and get the kind of distance in that I needed to do. So I moved to cycle at night. I saw pretty much nothing of Egypt for the next 3 days because that particular day, I went to bed around 6 or 7 p.m., woke up at around midnight, 1 o'clock, cycled for as many hours as I could before the sun came up, and then got to my destination before midday every single day, and managed to do that moving forwards. There were some more challenges in Egypt. The police were obsessive compulsive about knowing what you do and where you're going. I learned how to manage police checkpoints. There was a police checkpoint every 20 kilometers, perhaps maybe 30. The secret is, number one, cycle in the dark because they're asleep most of the time. And number two, when you do go through a police checkpoint, just wave at them and go as fast as you possibly can. Because once you get through, on a bike, you can get through. You can get past the barrier. They can't be bothered to chase you. So I managed to combat the police by just going through the checkpoints. When we arrived in Aswan, I don't know if anybody knows about Aswan, but you can't get into Sudan without getting on a boat, which is kind of weird. But there is no land border between Egypt and Sudan. You have to get on a ferry, or when we were there wasn't a land border open. You have to get on a ferry, which goes once a week. There is one ferry once a week between 2 major countries. And if you don't get that ferry, you are screwed. You have to wait another week. So we arrived 2 days before the ferry, but you couldn't book it in advance. So we spent 2 days trying to negotiate getting on this ferry, and it didn't work out at all. So there's a lot of stories to tell about Aswan and the people we met there over the 2 days and how much help we managed to get. And the fact that I ended up in a general of the army's office in a fort trying to get myself on this boat, or negotiate a land crossing, or 2 Belgian guys with a Land Rover, who are happy to drive me through the desert to get me across the border. We tried everything we possibly could. But in the end, the only thing that could happen was for me to get on a flight from Aswan back to Cairo, and then from Cairo to Khartoum. And by the time I got to Khartoum, I could not go back on myself to do the northern part of Sudan. I just had to carry on and go south. The other guys had major dilemmas. And again, I'm not going to get into it, but they ended up on a bus. They ended up getting a car. They carried on cycling during the day, which was a mistake. But anyway, let's not get into that. All it did was prove my theory of not staying with them. When I got to Aswan Airport to fly back to Cairo, there was a customs officer there who didn't like my bags, didn't like my bike, didn't like what I was about as an individual, and decided to pour all of the contents of everything I owned over the entire airport floor to search for drugs. I then had to pick up everything and put it all back together. And this was about 2 o'clock in the morning after I'd found out the only way I was going to get to Sudan was to fly backwards and then fly forwards again. So that was definitely a test of my mental patience. When I arrived in Cairo airport, I had this flight overnight to Cairo airport. I then had to get another flight 2 hours later without falling asleep. Otherwise I would have missed my flight. And my water bottle was in my hand luggage. And one of the security guards decided to kick off about this and try and prevent me from getting on the flight unless I gave him $200 in cash. I managed to get around it, reported him to his senior officer. His senior officer ripped him apart in front of me and marched me to the aircraft on his own with, I looked like a VIP basically, but everything was trying to get in my way of getting through and out of Egypt and into Sudan. And the only way to get through things was to be tenacious and stand up to people in the nicest possible way. So I learned a lot about negotiation in Egypt and also keeping calm as much as I possibly could. So when I arrived in Sudan, I actually had to leave Khartoum at night because the temperatures in Khartoum were the same as the temperatures in Egypt. So I had to cycle all of Sudan at nighttime. There was one issue. When you cycle south out of Sudan, there are two roads that run parallel to each other, and I wasn't aware of this. One of them goes all the way south to Ethiopia. The other one goes for 20 kilometers and then turns into desert. I cycled down the wrong one and ended up cycling for 20 kilometers and had to turn around and cycle 20 kilometers back to get back on the road, to go on the right road, to go down. Interestingly, as I went down that road, I could hear a whole load of dogs the other side of the road. There was a big barrier in the middle. I could hear them barking, making a huge amount of noise. And I thank God that I was that side of the road and wasn't the other side of the road. However, I had to flip round and come back up and cycle past those dogs and forgot about it. I swear to God, they almost bit my legs as I cycled past them. So being chased by those guys didn't help at that time in the morning, especially knowing that I had to do an extra 40 kilometers on top of what I had planned. In Sudan, the roads were much quieter and the people were less interested in me, which was great. A big tonic, a big change from Egypt, but there was very little shelter and water was super hard to find. I also hit another major problem with my hands. So the cyclist palsy had kicked in on my right hand as well as my left hand. For most of Africa, doing up zips, holding knives and forks, threading wires, anything that involved some dexterity just wasn't happening. So I ended up using my teeth quite a lot to do a lot of different things. That photo doesn't really show the full extent, but my hand started to split in the middle. So I couldn't close my fingers together. I was basically doing a Vulcan sign pretty much all the time. Luckily, it did kind of stop to a certain level, but it was a real struggle. The remaining days in Sudan were super tough. So 3 days before the border, I was really demotivated. I did not want to get out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and get on my bike. On this particular day, I faced probably the lowest motivation of all time in Africa. As I left the hotel, I hit the worst headwind of the journey. It was unbelievable. It slowed me right down. I think I was doing something like maybe 6 or 7 miles per hour on average, heading into this headwind. And to cap it, I ended up in a lightning sandstorm. Now, if anyone's ever experienced one of these, they are probably one of the scariest things you can be in open desert. So the sandstorm started to pick up, but then there was pink lightning happening all around me, and I was completely in the open. I prayed to find some shelter, and I did manage to find, you can see a photo of me on the top right with my mouth kind of buff over my face, but that was inside a maybe 3 meter square block of concrete that I managed to hide in when the storm was going off. I've actually got a video, you can hear the noise, it's absolutely crazy. And I couldn't do anything about it. It kept going on, so I decided to get some sleep and woke up at 5 a.m. The thing is, that extended my day massively. So I faced a huge day in Sudan, all day sun, and I ran out of water, hit zero energy. You can see on the right there where I've had to fill my water bottle out of that puddle on the side of the road and convert it into drinking water. So thank God I had that bottle with me. I ended up doing that 2 or 3 times that day. And then in the middle of the desert, there was a honey farm. So just to be clear, I hadn't seen a tree for about 2 days. And then there was a honey farm in the middle of the desert on that day. And you can see the acacia honey stacked up on the side of the road, $5 for a tub of honey. And that honey kept me going for the rest of the day. So I was extremely lucky. On day 30, it says day 36, it's actually not true. Day 40, I hit a serious dilemma at the border, which I will tell you about as I entered into Ethiopia. So this shows you the most climbing I did in one day. So I did 9,918 feet after crossing the border, which you can see the little green mark, and traveled up into, so it's about 100 miles in total of climbing. This is 3 times the height of Ben Nevis, which is the UK's tallest mountain. And this was my toughest day so far. Now, the reason for this is because I had read when you arrive at the Sudanese border with Ethiopia, do not stay on the Ethiopian side because there is alcohol available in Ethiopia, but not available in Sudan. So when you stay at the border on the other side, it's far more dangerous because there's a lot of drunk guys with guns and you don't want to be there. I ended up in a position where I took advice from somebody on the Sudanese border, moved over to the Ethiopian side, wished I hadn't, and then cycled 30 kilometers to a village where the only place you could stay was a prison. So I ended up sleeping in a prison. I couldn't eat anything that night because there was nothing to eat. I couldn't do anything, shower, get water or nothing because it was a prison. It was horrendous. And I think I slept for about 5 hours. I then woke up at the crack of dawn, smashed into 9,918 feet of climbing, having not eaten the night before, eaten about 2 energy bars. All I could find was some bread at a village halfway up and a bottle of Coke, which was weird. And pushed out all the way to the end of this. I could not speak when I got to Gondar. I literally couldn't. I had to sit down for about 10, 20 minutes to actually get enough energy to be able to walk through the hotel door and try and book in and try and sleep. This hotel in Gondar then served me up the worst case of food poisoning I have ever experienced in my life. So I ate that evening and I was in bed for 24 hours following eating. I was laying on the toilet floor in that room for hours on end. I couldn't keep anything down, period. So the worst day, the worst climb, lack of nutrition, low energy, and then I moved into a high altitude state as well. You can see a bit of the altitude on there, and then I got food poisoning. So that was tough. That's probably about the lowest it got. With all that behind me, I'd heard that Ethiopia was easier going. Now, it's not. It simply isn't an easy going country. It's really, really tough. While I was riding, kids were throwing stones at me. They tried to hit me with sticks. And that lovely gentleman on the top right-hand corner that I ended up taking a photo of had a whip in his hand and was cracking it near me as I went past him. But kids are kids, right? In Ethiopia, for them, throwing stones at people is just part of the fun. And when you stop, they're lovely. They're great guys. They just don't realize that when you're under that much stress, the last thing you need is stones almost hitting you. Later on in Ethiopia, my rear tire completely shredded on a downhill. So I'd already had my fair share of punctures, but in this case, my tire gave up and actually ripped off the rim completely. A guy there helped me to try and patch it back together. We ended up stuffing grass inside the tire to keep it going, to get me to the capital. And I actually managed to get a tire posted out to me on my rest day overnight and replace the tire. At the same time, I ended up with a bit of an argument with the Ethiopian Air Force. I drove past one of their air bases. I really liked the plane that was outside, so I took a photo with my phone. Someone noticed, and I had literally 30 guys in a truck with guns chasing me up the road to wipe it off my phone. But I still kept the photo anyway. So I had a nice run-in with the Ethiopian Air Force, which was interesting. On day 48, I found a puppy on the side of the road. So this little guy, I say guy, it's a little girl. She'd actually broken her leg and no one was doing anything about it. She was just laying in the middle of the road. So to stop her from getting run over, I actually put her inside my jacket and cycled up the hill with her. We did have a film crew that was filming some of what we were doing, and they were there at the top of the hill, and they looked after her for a couple of days and then gave her to an Ethiopian family. I really did think about taking her on the rest of my journey, but obviously that wasn't practical. So the border between Ethiopia and Kenya is interesting because the north of Kenya is completely impassable. There's a place called the Isiolo Road. It's about, I think it's about 200 kilometers in total, and it's bandit country, so it's lawless. Anyone that's passing through northern Kenya is likely to get shot at because they want to steal what you have and take it from you. I ended up in a UN convoy with jeeps and various other things that took me down the road. You can see one of the guys there on my right. It was absolutely nuts. Bombing down that road in that convoy, traveling as fast as they have to travel to do it safely, was crazy. And my bike bears the scars of the road. I basically had it in the back and it almost took the seat post off. It was rubbing so much. It almost cut straight through the seat post, which is crazy. I managed to get down that road in a record 12 hours. A lot of people, it takes them maybe 24, 36 hours because of the speed they have to travel. But being in a UN convoy, it seemed to move much quicker. On day 55, I genuinely missed the Rift Valley. So I didn't look on my map, but the Rift Valley is one of the biggest valleys in the world, and it's off the scale when it comes to what you drop and ascend. I was actually trying to find the stats for it, but I couldn't find them, so I'll just give you some nice photos instead. Crossing the equator is amazing, but I did it with 1 hour left of sunlight, and you don't want to hang around in Kenya in the dark. But I had to climb up the Rift Valley in the dark on day 55 to actually get it done. I don't know why I didn't think it was there, but anyway, my navigation has improved quite a lot since then. So Uganda. Uganda was the one final country before we hit Rwanda. This was day 59 to 65. I almost got arrested at the Ugandan border for cycling. So the gap between the two borders, there's a sign that says you're not allowed to cycle. And I didn't notice the sign and decided to cycle between the two border lines. And a policeman genuinely took me into an office and genuinely was going to arrest me for doing that. So Uganda wasn't a particularly good welcome. I managed to talk my way out of it. I was also told that Uganda was flatter than Kenya and Ethiopia. News for everybody, it's definitely not. It's got lots of hills. So don't ever assume that things are going to be good. Always assume the worst. The other thing that was kind of prevalent in Uganda was the fact that people like to overtake each other a lot. And so I had lots of oncoming lorries on my side of the road that if I hadn't jumped into the ditch on the side of the road, I would have got hit by lorries. So that happened maybe 5 or 6 times when I was there. It seemed to me that fate wanted to stop me before I hit Rwanda. I'd got so far, and then to get hit by a lorry would not have been cool. So Rwanda, day 66. And look, the most bizarre thing about Rwanda was we only had to do 66 miles to get to Kigali. Rwanda is a tiny little country. And, you know, Rwanda means land of hills, but most of our journey to Rwanda was downhill. It was downhill from the border. So that day into Rwanda was probably the best day of the entire journey, for sure. The fact we were doing such a small mileage was great, but we also had a police escort from the border. And there's nothing quite like having a police escort in Africa when you've been up against so many challenges before that. So you can see the other 2 guys managed to make it eventually. And we agreed that we were not going to go into Rwanda independently. We would meet at the border and wait for each other and then go in together. So lessons learned. The 4 things that I mentioned at the beginning, I can now tell you the answers. The 4 things that I learned the most about when I was on this ride. So what to do in tough situations. Look, being calm is number 1. I learned to be calm. Getting animated doesn't work. Certainly somewhere like Africa, people don't care. You have to be human. And it's really important that you respond to things and don't react to things. When you've got high stakes, it does sharpen your mind. So you would know that if you didn't manage to negotiate that tough situation, you wouldn't be able to carry on. So putting yourself in those positions does improve your ability to negotiate. Train tough. So if you do tough things in training, the reality of when you do something is easier. You need to make life hard. So it becomes relative. When you're doing it in a certain situation, if it's happened before in training, then you know you can do it. And there's nothing quite knowing like knowing. When you know, you know. If you've done it before, you've got real inbuilt deep confidence. That's super important. Affirmation is important. So when it comes to life generally, the fact that I did Rwanda, cycled to Rwanda 8 years ago, does stay in my mind, but you need to keep affirming it. You earn the right every day. You're only as good as your last day. So you need to keep challenging yourself. Keep facing tough things. Scaring yourself in advance is important as well. So you need to put yourself under pressure. You need to be in a position where you go to places that other people won't go and you do things that other people won't do. So that when you face those tough challenges and tough situations, you know you faced something similar before. Super important. And I think that Winston Churchill put it down pretty well. I mean, courage is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. What I've given you today are really the highlights of my failures for that journey. Trust me, there were 100 more on top of that, some more minor than others, but you need to keep your focus and keep your enthusiasm to drive forward. How to control feelings and focus. It's quite interesting because I realized during this ride, every single situation I faced gave me 3 simple choices. Stand still or do nothing, go backwards or go forwards. So when you've been riding and you've done 100 miles already and you've got 30 miles left to go, you can't just stop. You have to do something. If you're tired and worn out, you're in a position where going back, staying where you are, or going forwards are only the only choices you have. And it's pretty much like that in life. You just have to keep moving forwards, regardless of how much it hurts or how slowly you're moving. Controlling my feelings and focus was done in a pretty simple way, to be honest. First of all, I had things like lollipops and sweets with me. I wouldn't eat those until I'd done something significant, a certain mileage, got past a certain village, done something specific. I treated myself like a child a lot of the time. Expecting the worst and hoping for the best. So false summits is something that you face a lot when you're doing a bike ride. You think you've got to the top of the hill and you haven't. You basically need to expect that to not be the top. You need to expect the end not to be the end. You need to get your mind ready for more. You should always keep more in the bank, ready to do more all the time. And acting was something that I learned. It's easier to act yourself into a better way of feeling than to feel yourself into a better way of action. So I would pretend everything was okay. I'd pretend I only had 5 more miles. I'd pretend that it was going to get better. And that would help me get there. I would pretend things were great. But they weren't. However, because I pretended they were, I felt better. And because I felt better, I moved forward. This quote absolutely epitomizes the way that life should really be when it comes to making yourself feel better. Do it. Start doing it. You'll feel better. Move forward. You'll feel better. So act yourself into it. That's the key. Dealing with people. One of the most important lessons that I learned when I was out there is that people are inherently good. Okay? I was threatened once. I was helped over 100 times. In Aswan, when I was trying to get across the border, the Egyptian guys there tried to help me non-stop for 2 days. They'd never met me before, but they did everything they could. When I shred a tire, I got helped. When I was halfway up a mountain, the Ethiopian family I met gave me everything they had, all the bread in their house. When I was trying to get across borders, everyone tried to help me get across. When we got to Rwanda, everyone tried to help us. The British embassy everyone was trying to help all the time. In Africa, people had nothing. but they give everything. You'll see kids who are wearing ripped t-shirts and ripped shorts and have no shoes, and they're the happiest people alive. They genuinely want to help you and help each other, and they want the best. I was scared and worried about people doing things to me, and all they did was help me. Everyone helped. And that gave me this real feeling of people are inherently good. Because there was no other reason why people would have tried to help me. And you need to remember that in life. Everyone is trying to do their best. It's important to remember. Putting a map on your back is important, by the way. So when you can't speak the language, if you're going to do a long cycle journey of any description, put the map of where you're going on your back. Because every border I went to, every person I met, I showed them my back. And it had a map on it. And they could see where I'd come from and where I was going. And they wanted to help me get there. So remember, the best thing to hold on to in life is each other. Super important. Finding your why. Okay, motivation is important, and your motivation is going to be tested when you do something like this. The sincerity of what you do something for is critically important. It needs to be self-focused. When everything else is stripped away, this will be the one thing that keeps you going. Before I started, I thought the reason I was doing this was to prove myself to myself. How hard am I? What can I do? What are my limits? How dark is the world out there? What can I really face up to? I want to help the kids and help athletes. I want an adventure. I want to be part of the 2012 games. This is my reason for doing it. That was my why for starting, but my why for finishing was I did not want to fail in front of other people. I didn't want to fail. When it came down to it, when I was in the sandstorm, when all these things were happening to me, I just didn't want to fail. And that's what kept me going. And that will keep you going in the darkest moments. So it's really important to tell everybody when you're doing something like this, because if everyone knows about it, then you can't fail. And my best friend in Canada sent me this quote the day that I left. So one thing that really kind of came through to me after all of this was applying the lessons that I learned on this ride to life. And the realities are that all physical and mental challenges mirror life as a whole. You know, cycling has its ups and downs, life has its ups and downs. You know, riding and physical challenges and the things that we do are like life in general. So when you learn these lessons on a bike ride, or you learn these lessons when you're doing physical stuff or trying to get through things mentally, you need to apply the same logic to life. Most plans don't survive first contact. That's a British Army rule, right? You plan and plan and plan, and then everything goes sideways, and all that planning goes out the window. So I learned one thing from this ride specific to life, which is plan less, do more. Say yes first, work it out later. Super important. So some people have had questions for me over the years, and obviously I'm going to chat to anybody that's left after I finish talking, but there are three main questions that keep coming up. So I thought I'd just kind of address those quickly now. Which was the best day? The last one. You can't beat having a police escort, the British embassy or the ambassador to Rwanda giving you a hug when you arrive, and getting hundreds of strangers looking after you and giving you hugs and everything else. I'd like to say that my best day was somewhere on a mountain when I felt euphoric and everything was incredible. There wasn't a good day. It was hard all the time. The best day was the last one. Simple as that. What did you think about when you were riding? What's quite interesting is that a lot of people think that when you're out there in Africa on your own, there's something romantic about it, that you philosophize and you think about life in general and you come up with new ideas. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. This is what you think about when you're cycling on a long distance journey Number one, why am I here? What am I doing? This is completely nuts. Number two, my legs hurt. My legs hurt most of the time. Don't fall off, because falling off is probably the worst thing that you can do. Eat, drink, repeat. Don't forget to eat, drink, and then do it again. False summits. All the time, I kept thinking that I was the top of a mountain and I wasn't. Thinking that I must have a puncture was about having a heavy bike on any kind of incline. When your bike's that heavy, you think your tires are flat, but they're not. So I kept thinking that I had a puncture, but I didn't. My bike was just heavy. I'm going to work out a way to ban car horns. I just don't think they're necessary in life. As far as I was concerned after Egypt, car horns should be banned. Headwinds are the worst thing in life. I would swap anything for a headwind. Crap road surface, I'd take 10 punches, 1,000 burpees, being shot at, anything to not face a headwind. They're appalling. What's next? What's the next thing that I'm going to do in life? Well, I guess I want to keep challenging myself, go back to places where I'm outside of my comfort zone, remember what I learned. You become who you surround yourself by. So I wanted to try and make better choices about where I go and who I spend my time with. And focusing on my mental comfort zone is something that's recently been a big thing for me. Things like meditation and getting your mind into a really strong place. And potentially maybe redo the route. Maybe do it again, but do it better and faster. That's it. Thank you very much.
Pete, that was wicked. The guys wouldn't stop talking through that. That was really, really cool. And as you can see, the chat's gone a bit wild. Lots of questions that people have asked. So I will just read them out, and then I guess we can just answer them. Yeah, to me really, and everyone else can hear. And guys, if you do think of any questions for Pete, just drop them in the chat and I'll read them out. So yeah, first of all was Ads, who sat next to me. He said, would you do it again? And you've obviously just answered that. Maybe you'll be right. So what do you think? Would you do it again?
Yeah, could you guys see me or not? Sorry, just to check.
Yeah,
am I back on the thing? Yeah, perfect. Look, I would do it again, but I've learned a lot since then. I mean, I've obviously had a lot more life experience, and I know a lot more about nutrition, a lot more about various other things. I wouldn't carry as much weight. Frankly, when I got to Rwanda, I really wanted to carry on to Cape Town. So that's the other half of Africa. So if I did anything again, it would probably be Cairo to Cape Town and do the whole thing.
Yeah. Foster's is up for that. Okay, cool. Next one was from Marcus, and he basically said, how many punches total? So how many punches do you think you had?
I didn't really count. I think I only had about 10 or 12 punches in total for the whole thing.
Cool. And next one, George Blackwell. So how good were those finish line feelings? Like obviously you've crossed a few finish lines like racing and stuff, even with me. I guess it's a big feeling than any of them.
You know, the funny thing about it, honestly, genuinely, it was 50% euphoria and 50% you actually feel a kind of weird depression when you get there, because you stop doing what you've been doing for so long. So to actually sit still and not move and not cycle, it created a very bizarre feeling. You didn't feel like you were progressing anymore. And also your purpose was to get to the finish line. So when you get there, your purpose kind of disappears. So it's actually weird. It was kind of a 50-50 thing. Yeah, it was euphoric, but it was also a bit weird to stop.
Nice, okay. Tom Walker wants to know, did you get any King of the Mountains? So I think that's like a strong... Did you win any? I
don't know, mate. I'd have to go back and have a look, but I doubt it very much. Not on that bike.
Okay. Captain Brian Hendy, you learned lots of lessons on this journey. What situations have you subsequently encountered in which you've applied these lessons?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, look, I think when you face challenges, when you hit things in your professional life that you think are hard, you just have to remember what it was like, you know, doing something stupid, like, you know, the Ethiopia climb, or, you know, food poisoning or whatever it was. If you get through that, you can get through anything. And, you know, certainly things that you end up facing, whether they're stressful in life, you know, they're family dilemmas or relationship management, or, you know, even if you end up in the middle of a Spartan race and you're feeling like crap, you know, your reference point for hard is a lot higher. and it gets you through. You end up getting through this stuff because it's easier than you thought it was. Everything's relative. So you need to go to do extreme things. So you end up with a reference point that gets you through stuff. I mean, specific references is kind of hard, really. But, you know, anything in life that's tough, you tend to use your I use this journey as a reference point. So.
Nice. Okay. Next one from Ragdad. Would you ever go back to Egypt? Or have you been back to Egypt? I don't know if you have.
I haven't been back to Egypt. I'd love to go back and experience it in a better way. I'd like to go back and actually be a tourist and enjoy it, you know?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I actually have a question. I wrote it down. When I saw you I never heard you say about the reroute, or redo the route, sorry. I think Rob Foster's would be up for that. So that's more of a question for him. Foster's, would you be keen to do this? Can he speak? I don't know if he's muted.
George, could you say that again? You went a bit funny there.
Would you be up for this? Obviously, as soon as I saw Pete at the end say redo the route, maybe it made me think about you doing it, because it sounds like something you'd be up for.
100%. We met loads of people. I think I'd say loads. When we travelled through Africa, we met about 4 or 5 different solo cyclists doing the Cape Town to Cairo, and it just sounds unbelievable. Just be so much fun, and Africa is so cool.
Okay, do you want to say your question now, Rob? What you just wrote?
Yeah, this is actually from Ash. She's just there, but she can't speak. How much water did you carry on the bike every day? Like, did you start out with?
Well, if you saw on one of the photos, so I realised when I got to Cairo that the 2 750ml bottles that I had weren't going to be enough. So I ended up going into Cairo and getting bottle cages and strapping them to the front forks and putting 2 more on there. So it really was about 3 litres that I was carrying, plus I could fit a litre inside the filter bottle as well. So maybe it was about 3 or 4 litres that I would carry in there. Honestly, water wasn't a major issue in terms of being able to get water, apart from Sudan. Like, Sudan was the big problem. The issue was getting drinkable water. So that filter bottle that I had was the solution. Even when I got bottled water, I filtered everything. Everything I got, I filtered. So yeah. It was, that was the key, really.
And if I've got another question, would your 2 other guys who completed with you obviously kept all their kit and camped?
Yeah.
Looking back, well, I suppose if you were to do it again, would you pack tents and go light? Like light tents, light everything, and then have that option?
There's a whole host of things I'd do. Number one, I would use a cyclocross bike that was half the weight of the bike that I had before. I would put the emphasis on speed and lightness over having something that weighs as much as a tank and is super robust. And, you know, it's not like I had too much kit. It wasn't like I had excessive kit by the end of it. I kind of learned in Germany to dump everything. But, you know, there's enough accommodation in Africa. I mean, if you can put up with just laying on a concrete floor in a room or laying under a tree and falling asleep there if you need to, then you just need a bivvy. That's it. So I would 100% do that. Frankly, if I wanted to have the best time of it, I would just have a supported ride. The whole reason for doing it unsupported was to make it a huge challenge. But the best way to do it is just on bikes and then have a support crew with you if you can.
Yeah, in a fight support van.
In a fight support van, that would be ideal.
Done. Sign us up.
Pete, George has just had one. Go on, George, just ask. Were there any moments you thought about giving up? And when you did have that thought in your head, how did you overcome that?
I thought about giving up quite a lot. It's one of those things where you, when you really are hurting, like when you're, honestly, some of those hills, the Rift Valley hill, climbing in Ethiopia, some of the hills in Kenya, you're always thinking about it. It's always in the back of your mind. But I swear, like, the 2 things that really keep you going are you have to tell everyone you gave up, right? Like, you don't say, oh, I got hit by a car and I ended up in hospital. or I, got eaten by a lion or something. It's I chose to give up. I gave up. It was me. I gave up. And you have to tell everyone that. And that's really hard to do because you've always got more. You can always move forward. You might have to move forward slowly. You might have to zigzag up the mountain instead of going in a straight line. And it takes you twice as long, but you get there eventually. And, on top of that, I swear to God, mate, you only have 3 choices. You either go back to the last village, which is like 20 or 30 kilometers behind you. You stand in the middle of the road and do nothing. What are you going to do? You're going to achieve nothing by standing still, or you just keep going forwards. And going forwards was always the best option. Always. Even when I was dying, it felt like going forwards. It just made sense. And you do get there. Like, yeah. Honestly, there were some times on the hill where I'd want to give up every 100 meters. Everyone goes through that. But you just don't.
Okay, there's no more questions in the chat, but I've got one for you because I know you recently told me that you still have the bike that you took to Africa.
Yeah.
You've got it with you in Dubai, right?
Yeah, it's really funny. So I flew the bike back to the UK, like it's all wrapped up, completely like sealed up, and flew it back to the UK, and I never unwrapped it. And then when I moved to Dubai, I flew it out here with all my other stuff, and I didn't unwrap it. So my bike is still...
That's my question is, will you unwrap it, take a picture of it and show us it all? Because I want to see it.
Yeah, I will do it. So it literally is just in the other room. Literally, I know exactly where it is. So I need to, at some point, I need to undo it and get it serviced. But it's still got all the dust from Africa on it after 8 years. So.
Last question from me. If you was to do the Cape Town to Cairo or vice versa, the other way around, would you use the same bike or would you get a better one?
Yeah, I'd definitely get a different one. Look, this bike is immortalized in my head. I love it. It got me through a lot of stuff, and it bears all the scars. But it's not light, and it's a heavy bike. So yeah, I don't know what I would use it for ever again, to be honest, because there are better bikes out there now.
Awesome. The last thing the guys are asking about your Christmas tree, because I know you still got your Christmas tree up. Yay! There it is. We won't go into that. Anyway, no, Pete, massive thank you from me, and obviously the guys really enjoyed it. I'm sure Foster's particularly loved it because I know how much he loves biking. And yeah, I'm sure that the guys, you've got this recorded, so we'll post this on our YouTube. And yeah, everyone can watch it, and we'll push people to watch it because I think it's really, really cool. And it was nice for me I've heard all these little snippets of Africa, but I've never actually heard the whole thing all the way through. So yeah, thanks, mate, for coming on and doing this. It's really, really cool.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Anything to say, Fosters?
When are we going to do it then? When?
Not in the summer, mate. Not in the summer is my answer.
Yeah. October.
Let's think about it.
Do something that scares you, right? No, that's awesome. Just super cool.
Very cool. Cool, sweet. I guess we'll end it there then, guys. Again, thanks, Pete, for doing this. Yeah, mate, just remember to finish the recording and send it over to me. And yeah, thanks for everyone who joined in and watched Pete's journey from London to Rwanda. It's really cool. Thanks a lot.
Right, man. Take care.
Everybody can leave now. Leave.